They talk in circles until your brain turns to mush. By the time you see it, the damage is done. This tactic is designed to be invisible. But after this, you will spot these patterns instantly. And once you see them, they stop working. They start answering a simple question by jumping to 3 different topics that have nothing to do with your health. Suddenly, they contradict what they said 5 minutes ago, and then they get annoyed that you are not following along. You feel your focus slipping. You start nodding just to make the noise stop. You check the clock and realize 30 minutes passed, and you still do not have a straight answer. Sound familiar? Picture a doctor who explains a misdiagnosis by talking about hospital policy, then their personal stress, then your complicated history until you are too dizzy to complain, or a therapist who answers your why with a philosophical poem that leaves you more confused than when you walked in. If you hear this, you are in it. It is more of a holistic nuance. You would not understand, or I am actually saying the opposite of what you think I said. Once you see they are just using noise to hide a lack of answers, the fog clears. You stop trying to make sense of nonsense. Now you know what this really is. But this next one is much more aggressive. They poke at your most vulnerable insecurity during a session, waiting for you to snap. The moment you raise your voice or tear up in frustration, they lean back and get eerily calm. You feel like a lab rat being prodded. You start apologizing for your outburst, while they watch you with that cold, professional pity. Been there. Imagine telling a provider they missed a symptom, and they smirk, asking if you read that on the internet just to see you get defensive. Then, when you get firm, they write "patient is aggressive" in your file with a sigh. Watch for these phrases. "Why are you so angry?" Or "I was just joking. Do not be so sensitive." Once you realize the calm is just a mask they put on after lighting the fire, you stop giving them the reaction they want. You stay boring, and they lose their leverage. That is the moment their control breaks, and it gets worse. They tell you about other patients who are doing much better with the same treatment. You are constantly measured against a perfect invisible person who never complains and heals twice as fast. You feel like a failure. You start wondering if you are just not trying hard enough to get well. Recognize this? Your therapist says. My other clients usually find this exercise life-changing, or your surgeon mentions an 80-year-old who was walking the next day while you were still in bed. If you hear this, the trap is set. Why cannot you be more like the group members who participate? Or other people with your condition do not seem to struggle this much. Once you see that they are just using shame to avoid changing their approach, the pressure vanishes. You realize your recovery is not a competition. From that moment on, the tension is not yours anymore. But wait until you see how they handle your actual pain. They act like your physical pain or emotional trauma is just a tiny inconvenience. Everything you bring up is treated like an exaggeration or a normal part of life that you are making too much of. You stop trusting your own body. You check your symptoms again and again, wondering if you are just crazy. You have seen this. A specialist looks at your scan, shrugs, and tells you it is probably just stress while you can barely walk. Or a counselor tells you that your childhood trauma was not that bad compared to others. Listen for these red flags. You are overreacting. It is not a big deal, or it is all in your head. Once you recognize that they are just lazy or out of their depth, you stop asking for their permission to feel what you feel. You stop shrinking to fit their comfort level. That is when you take your power back. But this next move is how they flip the script entirely. They accuse you of being the one who is difficult, manipulative, or dishonest. The very things they are doing, ignoring facts, being late, or being rude, suddenly become your faults. You get defensive and spend the whole hour trying to prove you are a good patient. You start explaining yourself to someone who is not even listening. Recognize the feeling. A therapist who is clearly burnt out tells you that you have an empathy problem, or a doctor who forgot to order your labs accuses you of being unorganized and non-compliant. If you hear this, you are in the mirror. You are the one manipulating the session, or you are lying about your symptoms. Once you see that their accusations are actually just a confession of their own mess, you stop defending yourself. You just watch them reveal themselves. Now you know. This next one is how they keep you coming back for more. They say they are sorry, but the apology feels like a slap in the face. It is always followed by a but or a subtle jab that makes the whole thing your fault anyway. You think the issue is resolved, but nothing actually changes in your care. You feel a weird sense of guilt, even though they were the ones who messed up. Sound familiar? They might say, "I am sorry you felt hurt by my comments," which really means they are not sorry for what they said, only that you reacted. Or, I am sorry, but if you had not been late, I would not have rushed. Look out for these phrases. I am sorry, you are so sensitive, or sorry, but you are remembering it wrong. Once you see that a real apology requires a change in behavior, not just a sorry, the spell breaks. You stop accepting the bare minimum. That is the moment their control breaks. But they have one last trick to make you feel alone. They bring in other nurses, doctors, or even your own family to tell you that you are being difficult. Suddenly, it is not just one person's opinion, it is a whole team against you. You feel completely outnumbered and start to wonder if everyone else is right, and you are wrong. You start to stay quiet just to avoid the collective judgment. You know exactly what I mean. A doctor tells your spouse they are just being dramatic right in front of you, getting them to nod along, or a therapist tells your family group session that everyone agrees you are the problem. If you hear this, the gang up is on, everyone thinks you are being unreasonable, or the whole staff is talking about your attitude. Once you see that they only recruit others because they cannot control you on their own, the team loses its power. You realize you are not alone. You are just the only one seeing the truth. Once you see this, it stops working. Most people walk into a clinic or a therapy office and hand over their entire sense of reality. They think the white coat or the degree makes the other person's version of the truth more real than their own. But you are different now. You can hear the word salad for what it is, a distraction. You see the fake apologies as the empty tools they are. You are not a difficult patient. You are an observant one, and that makes you the most dangerous person in the room to a manipulator. They want you tired, confused, and compliant. But now that you have seen the patterns, you are none of those things. The power has already shifted, and if you think these healthcare tricks are bad, wait until you see how these same patterns show up in your closest relationships. But that is a whole other story for next time.